Hey everyone. I just wanted to apologize for yesterday for our technical difficulties, but we'll get started now with the territory management. Let me share my screen with you. So, just to recap, we are talking about territory management for releases. Um, how this works is different for everybody. For the example sake that we've been working on, we've been talking about a single that you're self releasing that you want to somehow manage the rights for. Um, so, to sort of kick off from the tops that we covered yesterday, you're able to edit the local stores and settings in your account page. So this is the master account page. You would go to link settings, and here you can add your list of default stores, which we've gone through in a previous webinar. You can add, you can add your subdomain. You can also add store territories. So you can add any territory that's real and listed here. Um, I'd suggest creating those for any that you imagine you'll want to use. Um, it's really unlimited. You can do as many as you want. Um, but yeah, so these are the options. For localization, make sure that you select the same territories as the stores. So we can do a few examples today so you guys can see what this looks like. Again, this is for like releases that you want to have a lot of control over. Um, that you might want to be able to do different things in different territories. There's so many use cases that could be the reason why you want to take a worldwide approach to your release, but generally to start with, you want to select the territories that you know are part of your artist's sort of core fan base. You can get that type of information on Spotify for Artists, Google Analytics, Facebook, really anywhere where there's an insight that you can grab. Um, so going back to our artist folder, you can also edit the local features for the artist folder as I just showed you on the general account settings. So where you would go is just link settings within your artist folder, and you would add it in the same area. So for here, you can see that for this folder in particular, we already have some defaults showing. So I'll show you what those look like in a second, as well as different store territories. Um, I always like to say that if you're if you're gonna have many artists or you're gonna be creating a lot of links for your artists, make sure that you have those set up here. They can be specific to just your artist folder, and you want to make sure that when you're creating links for your artists or creating a marketing plan for a release that you have the audiences targeted correctly, because different DSPs are popular in different territories, which is something that you always want to stay abreast of as a artist or a manager or a label. So for this, we'll just go ahead and we'll say that we're just going to create a new smart link. Um, for this release, we've been using multiples, so we'll just select one that we want to take a look at. Um, so here, this is a link that's already been auto-scanned. This is already technically converted, so to speak. Here you have the option to edit different links for that territory. So what this means is on Spotify and desktop and mobile in the US, I could enter a custom URL here, save it, and when anybody accesses my feature.fm link and clicks on Spotify, they'll automatically be redirected to the link that I put in for the United States. You can have different links for the desktop and for the URL and for the mobile URL if you want. You can also have all these territories with that same customization. One thing to always be aware of as you're setting up an international release is the different DSPs that are offered internationally. So, as just sort of a brief overview, there's a few sort of platforms that you should be aware of. One is if you're doing anything localized to Africa, Boomplay is a very quickly emerging platform. I'd be surprised if you haven't heard of it. Angami in the Middle East. Deezer is particularly popular in France. There's a few in India, such as Ghana. There's also some native to Asia and specific to even countries within that continent. So QQ, KKBox, a few others. So just sort of be aware of those platforms and like what you're doing on them. We always sort of just think of just Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, Pandora, and the bigger ones. But just try to keep it localized. Try to sort of take in your international strategy that way. One thing that you can do for link settings is territory settings. So for this option, we've added in a few territories already to our artist settings page, which you can see here. You can manage your available territories in artist settings. You can enable all the ones that you've created. You can disable them. This is sort of the default. So if you want to enable certain countries to show up, you just have to toggle them on. So I'll show you sort of what that looks like now. So you see here, before there were no arrows. The default whenever you create a link on the platform is to be default. And the reason there's a little globe here is because it's worldwide, meaning that default will happen for everyone unless you carve out a specific territory. So what that means is when you toggle to the right, you'll see that France popped up. Now for France, I can edit this so that it looks different than in the US. So if I wanted to add another store here, I could add something. If you want to customize the copy for that territory, you can. If you want to change the title and the artwork for just France, you can. You're also able to fully customize the links down here as well. So if you want to enable timeout redirection to say Deezer instead of Spotify because you're trying to reach a more French-oriented streaming service, you can do that. These are populated by the services that you have here. So just make sure that if you're doing this, sorry about that. If you're doing this, that you're really taking into account the like international aspect of this and making it local to the region, because there's no reason not to take advantage of that customization. So if you go to Spain, you can also fully customize it as well. And what that will do is that when anybody from a different IP address accesses this link, they'll get served with the content that you specifically carved out for Spain, for France, and then anywhere but those two countries will just see the default. Let's save this. Now, there's a few use cases in terms of territory management that come up on the platform a lot. And one of those is if you're thinking internationally and you don't have the rights to your track in, say, Canada, or let's say that you have the rights to your track in Canada, the US, and Mexico, so all of North America. And then you have the option of, say you want to have the rest of the world be to a different distributor than how you're self-releasing. There's a way that you can set up feature.fm links, or I'm sorry, set of links that will enable you to be able to market more efficiently and keep track of the UPCs. So the quick workaround that I like to say or suggest to folks is one that actually our Chief Commercial Officer, Dan, has taught us how to use, or taught me how to use. So what that would be is you would create, let's say, we'll create one link. And we'll say this will be our entire world link. So for this link in particular, we're going to set up for like an entire release that like we'll be releasing on June 10th. We'll enter in a scan source. Let me pull up our marketing plan that we've been working on. 1 second. All right, so we've got our marketing plan. So for this link, we'll just use a Spotify URL. Oops, sorry about that. So here we'll say that like we're gonna auto scan. We'll enter in a link. So you'll see here that auto scan is off. We'll just set this up so that it looks like a fully usable link. And then you can see here that I have the autofollow set up for the playlist because I just entered that. For Apple, we'll enter in a link. Oh, that's an Apple link. Hello, Corey. We'll do post release link. And then we'll add in a few different DSPs that we want. So the added benefit of setting up your default stores on the artist folder level is that those will show up here so you don't have to manually fill these out. But for example, say today we'll fill in a few of these that are specific to territories. So I can show you how to set that up. So you'll see here I've got all of our sort of international DSPs. So we got KKBox, Ngami, QQ, Boomplay, and Ghana. All of these are popular within different territories. So we'll have this already filled out, and we will add title as well because we now have the option to add a pre-save on title. And then we'll enter in the post-save destination. Okay, that is all filled out right. And then we'll go to link settings. So here we'll put in that. We will change our layout to an advanced layout. We'll just populate the artwork. Sorry about that. We'll just populate the artwork from the Spotify link, which is a nifty feature that we have. Let me grab the link really fast. Import, it'll import the link, so we see that there. We'll just say, there's a new album. We'll enter in our post-release description. Then for our preview source, we'll put in other, and we'll just put in the Spotify, or sorry, I didn't put in the correct link. Let me just grab a YouTube video really fast. Okay. And then you'll see here that we have our default display order. Let's fill out the enable timeout redirection so that it goes to Spotify worldwide. And then for the default, I like to suggest leaving all of the DSPs that you have, even if they are international for the default. So what that means is that when the release auto scans on the date that we've set for the release, this entire thing will fill out with all of the DSPs. What this will look like if we were to carve out France, say, and Spain. I'll fill this out so you guys can sort of see what those examples look like. We'll make it regionally specific. So we'll fill in all of this again. Sorry, let me grab our link again. So we're going to walk through a few examples, but I want to show you how to set this up. So for France, we will say same thing. And make sure that you're filling in these two. There's no reason really to not fill these in if you're setting up a pre-save link. The added level of customization is really great. And then we'll go down here and we'll enter in, I don't think we're going to use a preview source for this, but this is the part that's really cool. So if we're in France, I'd want to make sure that Deezer's at the very top, Spotify, Amazon, all of these. I would then drag and deactivate the stores that I'm trying to be more specific about with regard to territory. So this way, when you have the release come out, these are the only stores that will show, and this will be the order that they show in. Right now, the only things that will show up are the pre-save because the release hasn't been out yet. We'll enable timeout redirection. Here, I would then enter Deezer if they're idle, because that's a really popular streaming service in France. And then everything looks to be filled out. So we'll go to Spain. We'll do the same thing, and then we'll edit the stores for that territory as well. It might seem a little cumbersome, but the setup is meant to be for people to be able to automatically edit the territories that you're doing. And really strategic marketing plans, you want to have things that are specific to the territory and the people that are in it. So if we're making this for France, we do want to put Deezer first. If we were making this for India, I would suggest putting Ghana first and a few other ones that are more popular there. At the end of this series of webinars, you will be an ace at creating pre-saves and smart links. So for post-release description, we'll say thank you, check out now. We won't put a preview source. We'll edit the default display order. Again, I'll drag down the regionally specific ones for this territory. And then we'll enable timeout redirection. I'll put Spotify for Spain. I'm really sort of driven to carve out as many territories as possible to make it a custom experience when somebody's accessing it from a different country, because I don't want to just have it be defaulting worldwide. So I'll try to take into account many different aspects of this. One thing that we want to do is be able to make it seem like you are really putting in the effort to the fans on behalf of the artists in the release. So here you'll see Spain is all set up, so we'll just double check everything. France is all set up, and then default worldwide. The rest of these, just make sure that they're turned on if you want them to be. Social cards are all set, advanced settings. You can put in your pixels here. So we have the rest of world link created. So this would be the link that I would use for an entire release that you don't have multiple UPCs for. Now, for the interesting part, if you do have multiple UPCs, this is the workaround that you can use. So for this, I would create a smart link. Notice I said smart link and not pre-save. So for here, I would enter in the scan source or the UPC for the release. This will be the link that we use for rest of world and not just for specifically carved out territories, and I'll show you why in a second. So for this, we will enter in the UPC here. So what we would do is we can just put in this link as a test. And then we're just going to use one service as an example, but you can do this this can be replicated across many different ones. We'll use Spotify and Deezer as an example. So what we're going to do is we're going to go here, we'll fill it in. We're going to call this rest of world. So remember, for our use case, we're going to do US, Canada, and Mexico are for a different UPC than for the rest of the world. Um, this is sort of an easy workaround, but it can be replicated for like any specific needs that you have. So we'll see here that like this is all filled out correctly. I'm going to use the advanced layout because I think it looks nifty. Our preview source, we can select none. Our default display order will be Spotify and Deezer. We'll enable timeout redirection to Spotify because it's my favorite global one for this particular artist. We've entered in our description. So yeah, that's all populated. That's all set up correctly. We've got email collection set up. Our social cards look, social icons can be set up. That looks good. And advanced settings. Okay. So we've got our rest of world link created. Now, the whole reason to do this would be if you have a UPC for release, so you can enter in the UPC, and then this way you don't have to worry about doing this later on. Next, I would carve out, I would carve out the specific territories for my release here. So for this, I would enter in the UPC for the link that I am going to create for just the US and Canada. So I would enter that in here. Again, for this example's sake, I'm just using the same link, but just imagine that you're putting in a UPC or ISRC. You can scan it. This can also be replicated for pre-saves as well. What we'll do is we will edit this. So here we're just doing Canada, Mexico, and the US. So we'll go to link settings, make sure this is all set up correctly. It is, we're not adding another store to this. But for the title of this, we'll put NA for North America. So we have rest of world and North America set. If you have more than one territory that you want to edit, you can. For this sake, we're just going to do these areas. So then we would go back into, we'd grab this link, go back into rest of world. So this is what happens. This is like the link that you would share everywhere, right? So for the territories that again, we're just doing Spotify and Deezer, but you can edit this for any of them. So what I would do is I would then put in my feature.fm link that I created. And I would do it here as well. Now you can do this with pre-save, and you can do this with Smart Link. And then I would just click next, make sure this all looks good, and then click save. This can be replicated with the UPC or ISRC. So now if I share my rest of world link on all of my artist socials, whenever anybody tries to access those two DSPs from Canada, Mexico, or the US, they will then be redirected to our North America link, which is populated by, hypothetically, our UPC and ISRC. Some other things you can do with this also regionally that I want to point out, because a lot of people use action pages, is the ability to make the action pages specific to certain countries. So for this example, we had 4 different Spotify actions that the user could take. Here, you're also able to add and remove territories for the action pages as well. The one really cool thing about this is that you can make it specific to the territory. So for France, because like I just said, Deezer is quite popular, you can actually go to France and edit these actions and add Deezer eventually, once that feature is available. If you want to add I see a lot of people use this feature and I want to suggest it to sort of everybody in mass. If you have like an Apple Music playlist that's just like, or like even New Music Friday, like Sweden, or New Music Friday France, and you want that to be the thing that the user streams or saves to like promote the playlisting that you've gotten, that's something that you can add here as well. So anytime somebody from France would come to this link, it would go to playlists that are specific to the editorial that you received in France, or even just a playlist that performs better in that country outside and then outside of it. Those are some sort of specific use cases that you can have for territory management for action pages. The other thing is you can also run contests specific to certain territories. So if, say, you have a brand that wants to help increase subscribes to your YouTube channel, you could carve out the territory and list it in your artist folder that they want to do it in, and then just toggle it on here, create an action page for the default for the rest of the world, and then create something that's specific to that country or that brand and be able to do it that way. You can also create something that I suppose would just be specific to a country if you wanted, or just promote it in that country and then have something default worldwide that's just like follow my essentials playlist on Spotify or something along that effect. That's sort of it for like the actual territory management. For the worldwide release setup for your release for the marketing plan, I would actually carve out in here like the worldwide plan that you're doing. So we had optimization features listed for Spotify, Apple Music, Pandora, and Amazon, and YouTube. But I would actually carve out here the streaming services that you might not necessarily think of as being like Spotify or Pandora, and make it a little bit more regionally specific. So like Boomplay is a great one, Ghana in India, KKBox, QQ. These are some of the more popular ones that just come off the top of my head, but I would really like delve into different territories and trying to like reach out to playlist editors there. Generally, the regionally specific ones are a lot more open and accessible. And really, it's just a great way to build relationships worldwide, because music isn't just popular in the country that the artist is releasing. Generally, you see a lot of success in like other countries around the world. And you want to make sure that any strategy that you have isn't just domestic or catered to just, Spotify and Apple Music. You want to make sure that it's worldwide and international, especially in these days, because everything is sort of internationally super well known. Also, like TikTok, that would be one that I'd have a strategy in as well, which we will delve into next week as part of a post-release strategy, and what you can do with Use My Sounds. But yeah, if you're creating activities for the links that we just set up, if you have multiple UPCs, you can follow the same actions with setting these up. Yeah, I think I'll take some questions now. If you guys have some, I see that there are some right now. Let me dive into it. Let's see. First question is, what's the difference between store territories and localization? Let me get back to that in 1 second. Allison asks, do you have suggestions on how to figure out which territories might be interested in our music? Should we just trial and error? Generally, I would suggest, if you have them, I would look at like Spotify for Artists or Facebook or Instagram. YouTube is also another great one where you can really like hone in on the sort of specific, I suppose, like regionally popular territories for your artist. It really depends. On different platforms, different countries have risen up as sort of being the predominant audience, I guess, for artists that have monthly listeners. I know in particular for Spotify, I've seen a really big insurgence as they've rolled out to new countries in like South America and other parts of the world. So I would just look there as probably a good place to start first. I hope that answers your question, Allison. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. outside of this. Ban asks, if we go through a distributor like CD Baby, don't they do this for us? And we have the option with them to select or deselect certain regions, countries. And are you saying on top of that, we can also do this on our own? Ben, we're talking about two very different things. For CD Baby, they'll distribute your track to certain territories on behalf of the sound recording that you're uploading to their platform. We're specifically talking about using Feature.fm to market to the people in those countries if it's available in that country. That would be something, if you're looking for like a strategy around a distributor, I would talk to the rep from CD Baby that you have. If you don't have one, it's super easy to find them or reach out via their contact information. Allison asked, does Feature.fm offer any translations for our links when we run these internationally? For example, translating them in Spanish-speaking countries. We do offer translations for links. You just have to specifically add the territory that you want, how I showed you in the territory settings. So yes, that is offered. For ban, another question, or is it better to do it all on our own to begin with and bypass our distributor, i.e. keep them at bay when it comes to distributing worldwide? There's no reason not to distribute worldwide at this point in the game. There's really, like, as an artist or a label or a manager, you should really look at the territories that you're popular in or the artist is popular in and really try to sort of plan your release out that way. There are certain territories where you can look at as a whole, and like the note about Deezer in France, where it's like it's easier to look for things there for artists and promote it there. Hope that answers that question. Let's see. Curtis asks, I got in late, my apologies. Where could I get a copy of this marketing plan? It looks like everything that I need. Curtis, that is actually in the webinar recaps. If you email me, I will be happy to share it with you. But any of the webinar recaps that we've done for this series have a link to the marketing plan, so you can access it there. Fadeville Records Limited asks, where can I find live data that shares the popularity of each digital store according to region? The answers that I'm giving now are purely through my experience that I've had. I would suggest building like a massive, I'm a nerd about this kind of stuff, and I built like a massive spreadsheet with every single DSP that I've ever done anything with, and then broken it out by territory. And then sort of, if you just keep abreast of like knowledge on like Music Business Worldwide or other music oriented websites, you can really keep track of what's popular and what's being covered by people. There's so many different streaming platforms and so many different ways of marketing music internationally in different territories. That's like its own webinar to cover. But just as a general information, you can look at consumption data. You could Google any of the ones that I've mentioned. Ghana is actually quite a popular streaming service in India. It has so many people that are on the platform. I think the numbers, the last that I read was like over 100 million people. So obviously, like, if you're gonna be doing a release and it makes sense to be on that platform, then you want to do your best to market it to that audience. But just keeping abreast of industry news and building out a reference sheet for you and your artist, because it's going to be different for every single artist and every genre of music and what type of music they're doing. If they're doing features with local artists, you can do different streaming initiatives with that platform. There's just so many things that you can cover. And to answer your question about store territories and localization, we actually have a great FAQ section where we've been actually updating all the webinars for everything, so you can read about those different types of features. But I'll get those articles up on here now. We can discuss it. So if you have like default link settings and things like that, this is a great article to use as a source of what we just went through. So you can select additional territories that you want to populate for each store. So the store territories will populate, like, so when I showed you earlier where it had like 110 stores like auto scanned, you can select additional territories that you want to populate for each store. So if you want to select them all, you can. If you don't have to. This is how you would select the countries you want to include in the select territory. So remember when I told you that that little drop down for the territories, this is where you would select those. Um, so if you had auto scan off, because we'll auto scan the release unless you turn it off. If you wanted to auto scan it, it will automatically fill those out without you having to actually carve out the territories. But here you can carve out the territories and it'll list it underneath it, where I showed you guys how to do the multiple UPCs links. And then for localization, you can create obviously an unlimited amount of layouts per territory. So what that means is if you list a territory here, like I showed you guys earlier, you actually have the option of editing the default stores that are listed there. So that's the difference between the two of those. I hope that answers your question. And in our webinar recap, we'll make sure that we include this FAQ article so that you guys have access to it. Answered your question. And Ban said, so for releasing a Hindi song, Ghana will be like a gold mine. Yeah, that's the best comment that I've ever had in these Q&As. Yes, that's correct. Like I said, there's so many different types of music being released nowadays, and just being abreast of all the platforms besides the majors is always a great way, because you could get so many hits on a small one in like India and it'll be more impactful for your artist than just getting like 50,000 on Spotify. But yeah, I hope that sort of helps in terms of like the worldwide release setup. And if you guys have any questions specific to territories, feel free to reach out to me. We'll be having this webinar as a recap for you all. So you're able to read it and use it as like a guide. And then next week we'll be covering post-release success and sort of what you can do to continually market your releases. But thank you to you all for coming. Sorry for the technical difficulties yesterday, but next week will be normal as planned. And yeah, thank you guys for coming.